record for the 10, 5, last 2 minutes and last 30 seconds of the presentation. During the last 10 seconds of the speech, I will indicate by means of my two hands the number of remaining seconds. A team not having ended its presentation after 20 minutes will be stopped to move on to the period of questions. The period of questions of a maximum duration of 5 minutes is assigned to the jury at the end of the presentation. I would like to remind to each judge that it's mandatory to ask at least one question during this period. Please note that you cannot reveal the name or source of your university, as it may be disqualified. I would like to ask the public to turn off the ringing of their cell phone, and I will now invite the judges to present themselves.
Hi, my name is Maxime Serra. I'm a CPA auditor, and I'm a controller at Telecar.
And my name is Marco Leclerc. I work at the Investor Group as a specialist in life insurance, and I'm also a CPA.
Founded in 1969, Jean Coutu was based on the promise of one thing: affordable medicine for all Canadians in Canada. Since then, it has moved to the second biggest pharmaceutical retailer in Canada, but now we at Compensated Sites are here to guide you, Mr. Somblin, to the new futures of Jean Coutu. So, moving on to the introduction, why were we here today? We were here today to advise Mr. Somblin on if the client should acquire Jean Coutu, and if so, at what price. With that in mind, we had three key considerations: the market conditions, the valuation methods, and finally, Mr. Somblin's assumptions when it came to the model. So, moving on to our recommendation. We are here to recommend you to take Jean Coutu private at a price of $13 per share with three things in mind: communication, deal structure, and the integration of Jean Coutu itself. So moving on to our analysis. So what we've seen is that the pharmaceutical market is set to grow in three key places: the aging population in Canada. So as we move on, the baby boomers are going to become older, and as such, they're going to need more medicine, and therefore we're going to have a main driver in increase, which is 63% of Jean Coutu's current use is through prescription medicine, and so that's set to grow even more as people get older and buy more medication. Second, patent expiry. You've currently acquired ProDoc, which provides you with patents of generic medicine. So with that in mind, with patents expiring, you're going to be able to generate more patents for generic medicine to your consumers. And finally, the pharmacy per capita. Quebec currently is one of the lowest, or is the lowest, in all three of your current markets, being Ontario, New Brunswick, and Quebec. And as such, we believe that Quebec is below average and allows for future opportunity of growth because you can penetrate the market further with more pharmacies. Overall, what we're trying to say here is that Jean Coutu is very well positioned to take advantage of the growing industry of pharmaceuticals in Canada. Next, moving on to our competition. We've highlighted three of the main competitors in Jean Coutu, in the pharmaceutical market, the first being Shoppers Drug Mart, Uniprix, and Jean Coutu. As Shoppers Drug Mart currently occupies 36% of the market, Uniprix 5%, and Jean Coutu occupies 16% of the marketplace. We believe that because of this, it's a very consolidated market, and as such, you have more bargaining power when it comes to setting up your prices at the end of the lines to the end consumers. And again, that's very valuable for yourself when it comes to setting costs and prices. Next, ProDoc was probably the best strategic acquisition we've done in 2007. It has 260 products or generic products that you offer through all of your branches. It is horizontally integrated as such because it offers the generic medication through your branches. And finally, the pharmaceutical industry is growing up with the patent expiry date, so you'll have more patents to provide through your branches. So overall, what we're trying to say is that Jean Coutu has a lot of bargaining power and therefore can control the costs of its prices through ProDoc and increase the amount of products offered through their branches. So moving on, why has Jean Coutu been so successful as of late? Well, we analyzed three things. The business model through franchising, which provides you with a constant source of revenue streams with the franchising fees and the licensing fees. Second, business strategy. At a core, you were founded at providing the lowest cost pharmaceutical medicine to your retailers and to your Canadian consumers, so that leads you to a higher market penetration when it comes to cost leadership. And finally, the equity standpoint. The current share structure of Jean Coutu is 50% plus owned by Mr. Jean Coutu, and you have an equity stake within Rite Aid in the United States. So if you were looking at the question when it came to hostile takeovers within Jean Coutu, it would be really difficult because of the extra equity in Rite Aid itself. So overall, Jean Coutu is an attractive business model which is applicable in today's pharmaceutical market. So let's take a quick snapshot at how it benchmarks versus the industry when it comes to Jean Coutu. Well, what we've noticed is that Jean Coutu has grown about 3 to 4% in its top line. Second, its EBITDA margin is about 11%. And finally, Jean Coutu's gross margin is 17%. Now, if you compare it to the industry, the growth rate itself is about under 2%. The industry's EBITDA margin is 4%, and the industry gross margin is about 8%. So despite the recent volatility in Jean Coutu's price point, we believe that it's outperforming the industry and standards, where these are the key metrics when it comes to margins for the pharmaceutical industry. That is. So I'll pass it off to Josh for the evaluation.
So far we've looked at what exactly the market is, how the retail industry as a whole is operating, the growth margins that we have, and how Jean Coutu as a whole started as one little pharmaceutical store and grew into quite literally a Quebec empire. So now we really need to dive into what exactly should the price be and at what price should we bid for it. So I'm just going to walk you through a couple of outline of my evaluation. We'll walk you through what the operating assumptions were, changes in working capital, which is quite important within this industry, our discounted cash flow, whether it's the weighted average cost of capital, capital expenditure, and finally the sensitivity. Diving right into it, we can look at incomes based on the top line growth of sales. The average historically was 5.3%. Seems decent, but in the pharmaceutical industry, where really every market player is cutthroat and really trying to get your best margins and best growth, we believe that 5.3% is unrealistical due to the size of the firm and the growth structure. So really it comes down to about 3%, so all the way to 4% in later years due to certain synergies and also patents expiring, so there's certain difficulty in growing your top line sales as a whole. If we dive into cost of goods sold, historically it was about in the 84 to 83 range. We decided to drop it at about 82%. We believe that purchasing this company and as a whole, cost of goods sold can decrease due to accounts payable and accounts receivable. I'll dive into it later on. And so as a whole, we believe we can actually decrease our costs as a whole and increase our gross margins. If we look at it as an EBITDA growth, historically the EBITDA was about 9.1%, industry as a whole relatively in the range of 4 to 5%. So right away you can see that Jean Coutu itself is a prime player. Whether you compare it against Shoppers Drug Mart, Uniqlo, or any other brands, we can see that there is true value within the firm. And so from that, we look at 9.1% EBITDA margin growing all the way to 9.5%. 40 basis points seems not like a lot, but when you're at a large scale such as Jean Coutu, every percentage matters on your scale. So finally, depreciation and amortization. Really, we decided this straight line based on what was given to us because, as you can probably know, if we wanted to change our depreciation schedule as a whole, we would need to restate our previous years, increase costs, and I'm sure we can understand that on a depreciation perspective, we should relatively stay simple. With that, our financing expenses, we would incur financing expenses, and I'll explain later on, due to how the structure of the purchase will be structured. So with that, let's dive into our net working capital. So accounts receivable will be decreasing from better sales cycle. We are in the drug business, we are selling drugs as a whole, and customers at the end of the day, we can push down our suppliers and purchase, get our cash fees from our customers and pay down our customers will actually pay us up as a whole in a better perspective. So 28 days, and we streamlined it all the way to 25 days in 2017. If we dive into our inventory as a percentage of COGS, just to really see, we kept it straight line at about 8%. Why? Simply price of pharmaceutical increases, and there's a natural hedge from increasing your sale price. If your suppliers are increasing their prices, you could sort of in a way pass that price difference to your customers, and your customers will still buy it. Price elasticity simply. Finally, our accounts payable. So why is accounts payable decreasing? That's a good question. Increasing rate of payment will give a concession based on a purchase price of drugs. What does that really mean is that if we're paying down our suppliers faster, they can actually give us a discount whether we're buying on a larger size scale. And when we're operating a firm such as Jean Coutu at a size and we want to expand to increase stores, we can actually tell our suppliers, hey, I'll decide to pay you earlier on what was stated, and you just give me a discount on what the purchase price is. So really, it's a fair deal for all of us. So breaking it down, let's dive into our discounted cash flow. Our weighted average cost of capital. We decided to use a weighted beta of 0.61, which is based on what the relative market is, rather than using 0.41. It is a pharmaceutical business, but at the end of the day, when you look at the equity value of itself, there is a market share to it. Risk premium 3.5%, market risk premium 8.5%. We didn't question that; those are fair statements. With our current weight of equity at for about 45%, diving it right to our interest rate at 5% and a tax rate of 30%, comes down to a cost debt of 3.5%. So WACC is really 5.8%. But we decided to add a 3% premium. Why? There's strong growth expansion plan in the future, so it changes the risk profile of pharmaceutical Jean Coutu as a whole. And finally, the capital structure would stay relatively the same as the industry average within the grocery and the staple business as a whole is the standard. So this would really give us the result of our pro forma DCF from a relative perspective. it was simply what the breakdown was. So let's dive into our valuation method. This is really where the key changes and the key metrics really take into account. Long-term growth rate 2%. It is a pharmaceutical business. Population grows, people will spend more, people get sick. So as a whole, 2% is fairly solid. Moving it down all the way to our upside of a current share price. Current share price about $10.19. We get on a perpetual method $12.73. If we look at an exit multiple method, because intrinsically this is what the business is worth, but we also need to look at what the market really sees as a whole. We have to understand that the market is a voting machine, and at the end of the day, you could think that your business is worth this much, or the business as a whole is worth something, but the market might see different. So the EV/EBIT given to us was about in the 7x range. We decided to go to a 9x range. Why the two spread multiple? Simply because Jean Coutu as a whole is a better firm. There's better margins, better strong growth potential, and there's a lot of untapped potential, whether it's increasing synergies later on through acquisition. So a 9x multiple as a whole in 2011 is a fair range. So with that, it comes down to a share price of about $10.19, which is an upside of 16%. So what does that really tell us is that in comparison to our competitors, there is strong valuation and we are better off, hence why we went with the 9x multiple. Sensitivity-wise, we decided to really stress test our assumptions to see, is this really the right price, and am I making a right decision by doing this purchase, and what exactly is the price? We can see the range on a perpetual growth method, ranging from, let's say, 1% with a discount rate of 8.8%, $11.45, all the way to first to grow at 3%, we're getting in the $50 range. Seems interesting, but we have to also look at on the perspective of what the market is really voting it at. 8% discount rate, once again, on a 7x multiple comes down to $9.66. So really, perhaps at the current market range, the company itself would not be a strong purchase. So with that, we decided to go with an even better method. We decided to do a leverage buyout to really see what exactly would private equity really pay for, whether it's a strategic buy or even a financial buyer, and really see what multiple would they be willing to pay that. So we decided to go really with a takeout price of about $12, which is an implied percentage of 17%, about 18%, let's say. We'll dive into it later on. Transaction fee of about 2% and a $33 million fee, which is your investment banking fee. And so coming down on a multiple, whether it's 2011 or 2012, we get an EBITDA multiple of about 13 and 11. We decided to lever up the business. Currently, it's in the 45% range, all the way up to 69%. So really, if we want to get leverage return, we need to kind of squeeze our balance sheet and make a high return off of it. So increasing our balance sheet from 45 to 68 is actually not so bad, considering that there's strong recurring revenues. We are in the pharmaceutical business. There's strong cash flows coming from our customers. And so increasing our leverage is not as risky. And finally, what would their equity cost be? With the total fund would be about $2.6 billion. And then refinancing with our net debt and transaction fee would come down to about 2.88, which is our matching sources of funds. So really what we're trying to say is that the average PE multiple, the average PE IRR would be in the 15 to 25% range for a financial buyer. But if we're looking at it on a strategic buyer, it'd probably be higher, probably in the 25 to 35% range. But currently, based on the information that was given us and what the client really wants, we believe that paying a 17% premium on LBO would really give us the floor price of what the share was. So we decided to stress test it with our equity just to see what's our IRR moving forward. 2012, quite nice, 109%. Moving all the way to 2015 and 2016, which would be a decent exit, about 27%. So really, our IRR ranges from 32.4 to 27% in our terminal years. Hence, why paying that premium to a starting bet of $13 seems to make sense. So all in all, I've really shown you what different multiple methods were and what exactly is the true value of this business. So really, we think that starting the bet about $13 is a fair share for what Jean Coutu's true worth is. And at the end of the day, we have to remember, Mr. Jean Coutu himself started this firm as a whole with one store and really built it into an empire, so he needs his fair share. So with that, there's a couple of key questions, that I forgot to mention. Hostile takeover, should we do it? Yes, but it's not ideal, and here's why. Due to the fact that the Jean Coutu shareholder structure, there's a lot of the shareholders that is held within the Coutu family itself, there's a high premium you need to pay. If you really want to take down business on a hostile takeover, there's probably a 40–50% range to pay, and at that point, is it really worth it? Are we making the best deal for our clients? Finally, the intrinsic value would be about $13. And so another thing, why did we change our WACC? it's really the store growth expansion. If we have a dream of expanding our store growth, there's a risk profile adjusted to it, and hence why we went with the 8.8% market premium. So all in all, we think our valuation is quite fair within what the relative market is bidding at. So with that, I'll pass it on to Kira. She'll talk about implementation.
Thank you very much, Josh. So now that we've decided that we're going to pursue and acquire Jean Coutu, let's break it down and really look at what that means. So on a high level, there's a few key things that we need to discuss when going through the LBO process. The first is making sure that we keep in constant communication with the target. Make sure that we are going through the proper confidential information and making sure that we conduct the proper due diligence. After that, we're going to draft the purchase and deal structuring agreement, which we will dive into in a little bit more detail in a bit, and eventually close the deal. And if I could draw your attention to the very last line where we have our integration, this is the absolute necessary step. It doesn't end after we sign the papers and close the doors. This is where you become the new parent company of Jean Coutu. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So the deal structure, as we mentioned before, is now going to be 68% senior debt and 32% equity. As my colleague mentioned before, this is not a huge difference given that the historical debt to equity has been 40%, and also that we're in a strong sales cycle. So as he mentioned, we have recurring revenues, and for industries such as this is not out of the range of normal, and we see it as a positive. So, something to consider. We aren't very clear on who your client is who wishes to acquire Jean Coutu, but there's some regulatory information that we need to keep in the back of our minds when proceeding forward. The first is the regulatory body will protect the consumer's interests primarily. And this is something that we need to keep in mind, but we also already know that and are taking the appropriate precautions to do so. The second is that this may delay your timeline. While we do our best to make sure that everything goes as smoothly as possible, we need to keep in constant communication with regulatory bodies to reduce this risk. So, we need to talk about the integration aspect. So once we've gone through the traditional LBO process, what happens now? Who is Jean Coutu as a part of a larger company? So there's 3 phases within this process. The first is the high-level planning, where we discuss the overall guiding principles that are going to lead you into the future. We also define the strategy and the governance that's really important to set forward when we go through. Then there's the detailed planning. So in extreme detail, how are we going to communicate with both our people and the new people coming on board? And we need to integrate the projects that currently exist and make sure that they work with ours as well. And finally, the execution. How is the culture going to match? Because oftentimes when companies come together, there's discrepancies in between how they operate on a day-to-day basis, but we want to ease that kind of overlap and make sure that everyone works together towards a common goal. And finally, staffing and retention plans. Again, there's going to be overlap within companies, and we want to make sure that the best and brightest keep the vision of Jean Coutu alive and make sure that it goes forward in a positive manner. So let's dive into it. Let's talk about the first, the high-level planning. So within the guiding principles, this is where we really want to establish those timelines and the guiding processes behind the LBO. So making sure that everyone on board has a sense of purpose and understands that there's no necessarily risk involved and that they're here to help you. This eliminates the confusion between the people within your company and the people on board. Second, we want to define the integration and the strategy of the governance. So we want to create the internal teams that exist within your client's company to really guide the ongoing process of the eventual acquisition and define the roles and responsibilities. This way that there's no confusion and everyone understands the processes that are going to come about and making sure that everyone is on board and meeting their correct deadlines. The second phase is where we really go into detail here. So we want to talk about the communications plan. The first is with the internal employees. We want to make sure that they don't feel that their jobs are jeopardized, and we want to make sure that they understand what it means to have another company on board. So this is going to reduce the employee confusion when we build that internal team. The external team is the one that is going to be communicating with the public, making sure that everyone understands exactly what's going on when we acquire Jean Coutu. Now, for the project integration plans, this is kind of tricky because we don't exactly know what your client's current projects are. But we need to make sure that they are similar and we're able to arrive at the synergies that exist and make sure that the combining of each of the company's projects is efficient. And this is going to align the expectations once again within the company and make sure that everyone works together. The final phase is the execution phase. Here we need to integrate the cultures between the 2 companies. And then finally we need to have the staffing. So within the staffing, we need to have a leadership assessment. Jean Coutu has a great brand. Like we mentioned before, we've built it from the ground up. And to keep that is to keep its integrity, and we don't want that to go away. So having the proper staff to keep that going forward is going to be important going forward. So, of course, with any strategy, there are risks and risks involved. We've outlined 3 primary risks that we think you need to be aware of. The first we've already sort of tackled, which is the regulatory body that blocks the acquisition. But of course, we're working with the proper people to make sure that this risk is reduced to the most possible way forward. The second is that the debt rating is changed. So this is something that may happen. It's, as you can see, very unlikely, but if it does happen, the impact is super high. So the way that we can reduce this risk is with convertible debt. The third and final risk that we've outlined for you today is the integration challenges. So this comes with the third phase of the integration, and there are possibilities that the cultures clash or that there are issues along the lines with the checks and balances, but we're going to make sure that everyone understands their roles and responsibilities going forward. So, in conclusion, you have asked us, Simone Zakier, exactly what you think it means when you see us as a young analyst yourself. Well, just like Jean Coutu, you've seen that there's a lot of promise and potential. You're young and you're ready to keep going in the future. So, you've asked us here today, what should the client do? Should they acquire Jean Coutu or not? And we've said yes, under 3 key considerations. We want you to take Jean Coutu private at a price of $13. So without further ado, thank you very much, and wait for the floor.
Ask my question in French? Oui. Est-ce que c'est le prix maximal en fait, que vous suggérez de payer finalement?
Alors, le prix de 13 $, c'est le prix qu'on suggère que vous commencez votre bid à. Présentement, si vous voulez avoir, c'est un paramètre de rendement. Alors, par exemple, si je peux retourner à ma évaluation sur...
En fait, ce serait quoi le prix maximal?
Le prix maximal basé sur ce que la valeur serait, disons sur un discount rate, ça serait environ de peut-être 13 $. Ça serait un peu la valeur intrinsèque de ce que cette business vaut. À la fin de la journée, il faut comprendre que commencer le bid à 13 $, c'est idéal parce que si on regarde du côté d'un private equity firm, il faut au moins avoir un 25% de rendement pour que ça makes our time worth it. Alors dans ce côté-là, on trouve que commencer notre bid à 13 $, c'est idéal. Puis pourquoi commencer ce bid à 13 $? Il faut comprendre que M. Coutu lui-même une partie de cette entreprise. Puis in order for him to actually sell his shares, we need to start our bid and kind of increase it as a whole so we can get our shareholder investors on our side. So we can eventually take off a lot bid.
I want to come back on your financial projections, slide like 13 or something like that. In the sales growth, you have a variation in 2014, 15, and what explains this variation? So you're coming from 3, 2.5, 4.2, and then it's coming back down. So what explains this kind of curve?
Correct. So there is that valuation in year 2014. They are currently, Jean Coutu as a whole has a certain acquisition pattern where they are buying certain firms, whether it's Prodima, etc. These firms that increase your top line growth as a whole. The increase in Y year in 2014, we have to take into account factors that drug prices do change, and even though there are strong regulations within keeping the drug prices fixed, we can see that historically companies like Valiant, etc. have changed prices, and so the reason why there's that fluctuation is really to show the top line growth, and showing a 4.2% growth is really lower than what was given at about 5.3 consistently. Okay. So if you're able to increase your sales in year 2009, 2010 at about 5% to 7% range, that increase in 2014 at about 4% is fairly justifiable.
Okay. And you've adjusted COGS from the initial model. So the initial model was at 80% of sales from the first year, and you've decreased it gradually. So does this have a material impact on the purchase price?
Yes, and the reason why we decided to not go right away with the 80% post-transaction right away is that the reality of things is that a lot of pharmaceutical businesses, whether you're Jean Coutu or a large pharmaceutical company, what really matters is your relations with your suppliers. And so decreasing your COGS really wouldn't make sense by decreasing by 3%. One, the size of your business. You're a large-scale business, and talking about 3% in decreased costs is fairly large. Second of all, a lot of it is contract-based, and so we decided to decrease it really at a slower rate, and terminally at year 2017 we come down to our base assumption of 80%. Is because at that perspective, like I mentioned previously, the accounts payable, we're paying down our accounts payable a bit faster, so there's a lot of concession with our suppliers telling us we'll give you a price break. So with that, we believe in 2017 really is the ideal time for 80%, and it really shows our conservative valuation of what this business is really worth.
And I'm not sure I remember what capital expenditures have you suggested for this kind of growth?
So if I can just dive right into pro forma DCF, and so our capital expenditure as a whole, we increased it at about 1.5% to 2% on a sales perspective, due to the fact that we didn't get really what our cost structure or how many stores we currently have and what our cost of opening a new store. So we can look at, for example, cash on cash return of what the store really is worth. So we decided to go really with a higher bandwidth of 1.5 to 2%, when historically it's about 1% of sales. We decided to go with 2%. One, it's the initial capex of opening your store. Second, it's the rent expense. We're not owning our stores. Jean Coutu's business model as a whole is we're renting our stores, and so the capex is really just to put in the infrastructure inside the store to really start your pharmacy and pay a certain maintenance capex on your, whether it's your technology, your operation systems, etc.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Chaud pour eux. Tá,